Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast tent at the Hay Festival.
And it's Alex in the Newscast tent at the Hay Festival.
And hello, newscasters who are here. And also, to keep us company in this very hot tent, please welcome our guest for today, Patrick Maguire, who's the chief political commentator for The Times. Hello, Patrick. Come on in. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Right, so Alex, we're recording this episode of Newscast on Bank Holiday Monday at 1:05. The big breaking news in the last couple of hours was in Edinburgh, where Peter Murrell, the former chief executive of the Scottish National Party, former husband of Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, has pleaded guilty to embezzlement. I was going to say bringing an end to quite a long-running story in Scottish politics, but actually it's not necessarily the end yet. But to sort of bring us up to date for Monday.
Yeah, I mean, just a tiny bit of background, which we can get into more, but so people know, this has really been going on since 2021, when there was a police investigation into the SNP's finances. Lots of stuff has happened since then, which we'll talk about. But this big news today is that Peter Murrell, who was the chief executive of the SNP for more than 20 years, he has pleaded guilty to embezzling £400,000 worth of goods, money that was effectively meant for the SNP that he was charged and tasked to some degree with managing. And there's a lot of detail in there about the kind of goods that he's purchased. He's been remanded in custody after that guilty plea, so he was in court this morning. That is a really significant development after what has now really been a 5-year police investigation with all of the ramifications that it's had for the SNP.
And just in terms of going forward, in a few days' time, we'll get some more detail from the judge about what he thinks went on in this case, and then we'll get the sentencing.
Exactly right. But we've already heard from some of the senior police officers who were involved in this very, very lengthy and, I think fair to say, complex and incredibly high-profile investigation. And one of the Police Scotland officers said that Murrell had abused his privileged position to bankroll a lavish lifestyle he craved but could not afford. I think it gives you a sense of just how serious the judicial system is going to take this.
And Pat, I mean, Peter Murrell wasn't a household name across the UK when he was in his job. I mean, he's become a household name now because of this story in this case. But he was a very important figure in the SNP.
Yeah, of course. He was. You cannot understand the story of how the SNP came to become the predominant force in Scottish politics for 2 decades now. They've just won a term that will take them into their 3rd decade in power. 4th decade in power, actually, from 2007 to this term ending in 2031, without understanding Peter Murrell and that power couple he was one half of. You know, he is a name as significant as Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, Angus Robertson. You know, and it's the end of an era in SNP politics. And obviously, the trial took place after the elections to avoid the impression of it being influenced. But it is interesting that this has all happened. Like, this story has been going on, but the SNP have just won a full term. Yeah, it goes to show actually he built something that was almost gravity-defying, and so gravity-defying that it's survived his own legal troubles.
Yeah, and Alex, just in terms of that, not to turn you into a legal expert on the spot.
Please don't.
Well, let's see how it goes.
Okay.
This is embezzlement, which is different from theft, and also people might see some sort of wild-sounding items floating around. Just explain where that's coming from.
Yeah, because we've had some details. In fact, the BBC actually applied to the court to get a list of the details that are involved in this embezzlement. So isn't the difference, and I'm not a legal expert, so forgive me if I get this slightly wrong, but effectively he hasn't gone and stolen something. He was put in charge of stuff and he's used it for his own ends and means instead. So it's a slightly different thing. But, they're talking about luxury items that are included in this: jewellery, cosmetics, 2 cars, a motorhome. People might remember there was this kind of famous image of the motorhome outside of a property, which became a huge part of this investigation. Now he's bought that motorhome using money that was meant to be for the SNP, that he's now, according to what he's admitted to himself, has used for his own personal gain.
And we've had a statement on Instagram, intriguingly, from Nicola Sturgeon. But then maybe it's not intriguing because she's not a politician anymore. She's the ex-First Minister. She's an ex-member of the Scottish Parliament. And actually, she sort of lives a more kind of Instagram-y life now, doesn't she? Yeah,
she does. She does. And it's worth obviously remembering that in the context of this long-running investigation, Nicola Sturgeon herself was arrested as part of Operation Branchform, the name of the police investigation into this, as was Colin Beattie, who was the former SNP treasurer. They were then released, and then they were told last year that they were no longer under investigation. Nicola Sturgeon's put out this statement. She said, "I'm angry, hurt, sad and very distressed about the impact of his her ex-husband's actions on family, friends and the SNP. To be deceived and let down by the husband I loved and trusted will cause me acute pain. Why he acted as he did will always be beyond my comprehension. So making it very clear again, as she has done before, that the police did look into Nicola Sturgeon as part of this, but she was told that no action was brought against her. She isn't a politician anymore, but you can't forget how much of a high-profile role and figure Nicola Sturgeon was, not just in Scottish politics, but in the SNP for such a long period of time. And there was obviously this dynamic where you had her former husband, Peter Murrell, who was the chief executive of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon as the leader of the party and the First Minister. So they kind of dominated SNP politics for a hugely significant period of time. And after Nicola Sturgeon's resignation and then this police investigation that followed with this partial conclusion now around Peter Murrell with further legal steps to follow, it did create a huge period of instability for a party that had been so dominant really in the immediate run-up and then subsequently after the 2014 independence referendum.
And Patrick, I'll ask you a bit more politics in a second, but just before we do that, the other bit of Nicola Sturgeon's statement I thought was quite interesting was when she talked about, I am still healing from the trauma of this, which to some people will be a sort of emotional openness that is quite unusual from a politician. Other people might think it's a bit therapy speakish. But as we're at a book festival, it reminds me of reading Nicola Sturgeon's autobiography last year and then talking to her about it.
You interviewed her about it as well.
In the Newscast studio, yeah. Presumably still available on BBC Sounds, and you can watch it on iPlayer. And actually, I was struck by she was trying to find a new language for politicians' memoirs when she was writing that book that was a lot more emotionally honest. And so I thought it was intriguing that even in her statement today, she's trying to speak, much more emotionally.
And there's some people that have actually said that that's a really good thing to hear from politicians. There have been others who've been fairly critical of that approach, it's worth noting. But it is a departure from what you've seen and heard sometimes before from former leaders, especially not long after they've left office, because that was the other thing. Nicola Sturgeon came out with her memoir not that long after she'd been, heading the Scottish government for a long period.
And of course, Nicola Sturgeon was the most political of politicians.
Yes.
It wasn't just like some person that was plucked from obscurity. She had spent her entire life doing politics, so maybe there was a bit of reinvention going on in there as well. Patrick, do you have a theory then about how the SNP managed to defy gravity? A little wicked reference there. To have such huge electoral success while having all sorts of scandals like this one, and then they lost a whole series of first ministers in quite a bad way.
Well, I guess there are two quite short and simple answers to that. The first is that the constitutional debate in Scotland means the SNP's floor, so long as there is no more attractive...
Floor as in ground, not floor.
Yeah, as in floor, floor with two O's. Floor, as they might say in parts of Lancashire. As people in Hindley and Ince and Ashley and Makerfield that are all voting on the next Prime Minister, that's how they pronounce
Slick, yes.
There you go. Is higher than any other than comparable parties, right? Because save for... Alex Salmond tried it. Some people think the Greens might end up in this space, but as long as there's no serious pro-independence rival, there'll be 30%, 33% of the Scottish public who always vote SNP regardless, because independence is the most important thing to them, right? So that gives them a higher floor. And when Keir Starmer's as unpopular as he is, and when the National Labour government is unpopular as it is, and Assawa obviously tried to get out ahead of that in February when he called for the Prime Minister to go, failed, it means that the SNP comparatively have to do a lot less than any other political party, certainly than Scottish Labour, to retain their largest party status in Holyrood. So it's it seems crazy if you think about it, winning a fourth successive term when so many of the key indicators, health, education, general sort of standards in public life, are flashing red on the dashboard. But look at the alternatives and look at the sort of constitutional factor too.
It's interesting because there was, for a long time, this period that I talked about of sort of dominance of the SNP, where you had Alex Salmond and then Nicola Sturgeon, who initially were obviously this very close partnership, and then there was some falling out, and then Nicola Sturgeon took over as First Minister for a long period. And then there was this really rapid period of instability. We had Nicola Sturgeon resign, then you had Humza Yousaf, and then the party felt like it was in a very turbulent period. John Swinney, who came in as First Minister after that, I think he was seen by many as a kind of safe pair of hands, almost brought in to restore a sense of stability in the SNP, because he's a guy that's been around the party for a very long time. He came in as First Minister not as a new fresh face or a new kid on the block promising something kind of radically different. And he almost started talking initially, not so much about the constitutional question, but what he was calling the bread and butter. So things like education, cost of living, NHS, public services. So I think for the SNP, they were, with that John Swinney seems to have done, kind of borne out by the recent Holyrood election results, restored a sense of calm, despite the fact that I think anybody would have to acknowledge it's been a really turbulent period for the party if you take it in the round of the last kind of 5 years. And
you mentioned Anas Sarwar. So is he staying on as Scottish Labour leader, even though they did not do well in the Scottish Parliament election?
Well, it was suggested to me the other day by a Scottish Labour figure that Sarwar had vowed not to resign until Keir Starmer resigned, so as not to be beaten to it by the man whose head he called for in February. He is in an invidious position in that most of what happened in the Scottish Parliament elections, you can't really realistically say was his fault. The national government was so unpopular. Keir Starmer was so unpopular. I mean, you do hear people in Scottish Labour saying, well, we ran a presidential campaign. It was all about Anas for First Minister. But ultimately, they were never going to elect a Scottish Labour First Minister if they were that angry with the Labour Party. So he probably, there is an expectation that he will go at some point, but it's not as if changing the leader in Scotland is going to solve anything for the Scottish Labour Party.
Right, talking of elections, we're doing by-election cast during the 3 by-elections that are happening in the next few weeks. And the plan is to record that on a Friday and then put it in the podcast feed on Friday. But there seems to be so much happening in Makerfield in particular. We thought maybe we'd do a little impromptu by-election cast right now. So, Patrick, you've been to the constituency in the last couple of days. Give us a field report of what it was like on the ground.
What it was like on the ground? Well, I have to say, driving into Ashton in Makerfield on Friday, I saw 5 lobby journalists within the space of about a minute and 100 metres. And I thought, God, these poor people.
You mean the voters, not
the voters. God, not. I mean, look. Ultimately, the main political story of any day is, won't somebody please think of the journalists? But the people of that bit of Wigan Borough are in for. I don't think a single person in that constituency is not going to be vox popped. Look, it was as it seems from afar. There is a lot of admiration for Andy Burnham. I think all sides agree on that. He is local. He lives just over the constituency boundary. Reform, as they always are at by-elections now, completely ubiquitous. So you see a lot of Labour people.
Just what does that mean in practice?
Well, as in you can see the Reform people, you can see them brandishing their Reform Correx boards. They have a presence. But something that both Reform and Labour people have said to me is there is another force, an unexpected force in this. Restore Britain, the party set up by Rupert Lowe, the former Reform MP, who's kicked out Reform by Nigel Farage last year, set up his own party, significantly to the right of Reform. And Cabinet Minister said to me on Saturday, yes, a lot of love for Andy. It's going to be hard for the Labour Party. But the thing that most struck me is this Restore Britain lot are a real thing. I saw them canvassing. People were mentioning them on the doorstep. It was a real thing in a way that nobody has quite expected.
Right. And Alex, we got an opinion poll over the weekend. Just explain what that poll was and also why it's interesting, but there's some caveats.
Yeah, well, I would caveat any poll with a heavy dose of salt, to be honest, because I think we've all seen polls before that have just been completely wrong. And I think there cannot be an over-reliance on polls. But that isn't to say they're not interesting and can be insightful. But I think as long as you treat them in that kind of vein of let's be slightly sceptical about what the polls say, and then let's analyse it anyway, why ever not?
The parties are reacting to it, so it's not just us talking about it.
I mean, this is the thing about polls, and let's not do a whole thesis on polling, but the thing about polls is that they can actually influence a campaign in the way that parties behave and voters behave, so which is why you have to be cautious with how much weight you put on any one given poll. So the context of this one, it was a Survation poll, but it was a very small sample, so 369 respondents. So that's the key context, i.e. don't take this as completely read that this is going to be the situation. But that one poll found that Labour were ahead on 43%, Reform on 40%, and then to Patrick's point, Rupert Lowe's party, Restore Britain, were on 7%, which might sound like a small number, obviously, overall, but when you put that in the context of what is apparently shaping up to be a very hotly fought contest, if that's 7%, and this is, I don't know this to be true, but you would assume that's most likely to come from potential Reform voters, then that could be consequential, because obviously if it becomes a tight race between Labour and Reform. There are other parties in the mix too, but I think that's largely how it's being read and certainly being fought. Then if Restore eat into Reform's vote, then that could have a consequence. And this is quite interesting for Nigel Farage's party in particular, because you've got to remember, this is the party that's been eaten to everyone else's vote for the last couple of years. And suddenly they're going, hang on, someone's having a go at ours.
Where's my lunch gone?
Yeah, exactly.
And then talking of books, I was rereading Tim Shipman's book All Out War about the Brexit campaigns, because of course it's the 10th anniversary. Well, I was going to say coming up, but of course it's the anniversary of the campaign the whole time. And I think it was Linton Crosby said that polls are actors. Polls can have an effect on the campaign because people react to them, even though they're meant to be just a snapshot of opinion. They take on a life of their own.
Well, totally. Recall, by the way, we were just talking about the SNP. It's relevant here as well. The Sunday Times poll weekend before the Scottish independence referendum that had yes ahead for the first time, that changed the constitutional policy of this country. And what's interesting is speaking to people around Nigel Farage when that Sunday Times poll came out. You're right, polls are actors. It's going to affect their strategy. It's now all about squeezing that restore vote down insofar as they can, because they look at it and think we're 3 points behind the Labour Party. There's this big restore vote. Can we squeeze that? But then that invites the question, well, how are they going to squeeze it? What's their squeeze message to a party that is to their right? Is it just, you hate the Labour Party too, don't do anything stupid and, let Andy Burnham in? Or will they be looking right? And does that in turn have an impact on how they're seen by reform-curious voters who might also want to vote for Andy Burnham? So they could have lots of unintended consequences. But Linton Crosby was right. These polls are actors, and it's going to be a very compelling show.
And I remember that 2014 Scottish independence poll. And it's a bank holiday and we're at a festival. I think we can reminisce rather than just doing the day's news in real time. Because I was on shift, on the early shift the day that poll came out. And I remember, the massive panic from the unionist campaign and the unionist political parties, and then they cancelled Prime Minister's questions that week, and all the leaders went to Scotland. And I remember thinking, I'm not necessarily sure that's going to help your argument. And then, of course, Gordon Brown issued the vow.
Yes.
The famous pledge of more devolution to the Scottish Parliament.
Was that the week they activated the Queen to issue her veiled...
I think that had already happened.
That already happened.
I think that already happened, but I need to go back and read someone else's book. In fact, I could read Joe Pike's book about that. That'll be in there. Right, back to now. So, just lovely little reverie about 2014, that early shift. Probably one of the most exciting early shifts
reading
ever.
Proust, Adam. Yeah.
Yes. Well, any Proust readers in the audience? Oh,
one.
No. One or two. Yes, love this crowd. Back to Makerfield. So. Right now, we're sort of waiting for the Green candidate, and this is to be announced. This is their second go, isn't it?
Yeah, so first thing I'll say, and I say this not just as a kind of public service duty, because it's genuinely important to remember there's going to be a lot of coverage of this by-election, and there are a range of candidates standing, and you can find a list of all the candidates' names on the BBC News website.
And I'm going to read them out at the end of this discussion.
Good work. But it's genuinely important to remember that, because this is obviously going to be dominated by a couple of key figures, but it's only fair that everybody gets a fair crack. So the Green Party announced their candidate last week, and then within almost a matter of hours, I think I'm right in saying, the candidate said that they were standing down, citing personal and family reasons, and then subsequently emerged that they'd made some social media posts about the attack on the Jewish community, suggesting it was a false flag attack. Now, the candidate has apologised for that, but the BBC understands it's told that was some of the reason for that candidate withdrawing. So now the Green Party are in the process of selecting another candidate to fight the Makerfield by-election, and we might get that name today, as far as I understand it. Yeah. Obviously, the Greens are a hugely key factor in this race as well, because as we were just discussing about the potential of Rupert Lowe's restore to eat into the Reform UK vote, what the Green Party may do is have a real impact on the Labour vote. So there was actually a little bit of chat right at the beginning, before this by-election was even officially underway, with some figures in the Green Party. Caroline Lucas, the former Green Party leader and former Brighton MP, very high-profile figure in the Green Party, she was even suggesting that maybe the Greens shouldn't contest this by-election to allow Labour a clearer run against Reform UK. Now, that hasn't happened. The Green Party has said, we want to show we're a competitive party. Under Zach Polanski, they feel like they've got real momentum and verve right now, so they are putting a candidate into this race. And again, that dynamic on the kind of very broadly speaking left, the impact of the Greens on the Labour vote will be fascinating, because if you remember Gorton and Denton, the other Greater Manchester by-election we had where the Green Party won, they had managed to position themselves as a sort of main opposition to Reform UK. I think it's broadly felt, because of the profile of Andy Burnham in Makerfield, that sits with Labour. But what the Greens do here is going to be interesting.
And on reform, Pat, what was the amazing metaphor you had in your column on Friday about what Reform had been doing recently? Did they say that they'd had... It was
Can you
something
remember?
about one-night stands. Or was it someone else's? Oh, no.
Oh, no, I think it might have been mine, that what Farage's sort
Yes.
of the hangover of his repeated one-night stands with Tory defectors.
Yes, metaphor, alert, metaphor.
Yeah,
not,
sorry,
not
please.
reporting.
As we write in a newspaper, you'd write "please legal" in capitals,
But just
in
explain,
square brackets.
explain what that metaphor was, because I thought it was intriguing, because it reveals something about how reform have had a few sort of phases.
Yes, exactly. So look, start this year, Reform, who are as much an anti. They started life as an anti-Tory party, right? They are, not just to the right of the Tory party, but opposed to the Tory party, right? Nigel Farage has always been. His mission has always been to destroy the Tory party, right? I'm not even exaggerating. That's not hyperbolic. That's what he said. Anyway, at the start of this year, though, Reform were a bit spooked by a lot of Westminster chat about Kemi Badenoch coming back. She's bouncing. She is the coming force in British politics.
Better at PMQs, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And they were determined to shut it down, which they did with a series of Tory defections, Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, Nadeem Zahawi, all of which you could sort of make arguments for on their own terms. But it got to sort of February, March, and it was clear to Farage and his inner team that the cumulative effect of those had been to make them look like the Tories, which is not what they're in business to do. So they have resolved to return to a sort of purer form of anti-politics, right? A sort of pure populism. Less of the sort of like, well, this is fully costed, or, we love the OBR and the independence of the Bank of England. It's going back to pure vibes-based populism, which is interesting because Andy Burnham is offering the same thing. Indeed, Zach Polanski sort of offers the same thing as well in terms of what he does. And it's it's anti-politics. It is not sort of Toryism with attitude, and it is something entirely different. They're trying to get back to that.
And that's so interesting because Nigel Farage really for a long time built his reputation on what he would see, and some people would disagree, as being the man outside the tent who was kind of prepared to, and he did it through the Brexit referendum, he did it with his long-term Euroscepticism. He liked to present himself as the kind of man of the people against the establishment. But then there was this strange shift when they suddenly had all of this electoral momentum following the 2024 general election, when the big push from Farage himself was about professionalising the party, i.e. making them a kind of credible electoral force and coming up with a policy platform that would align with that. And then when you saw Robert Jenrick join the party, and there were a little few hints of things, like Nigel Farage rode back on his position on the triple lock when he'd sort of flirted with the notion of getting rid of the triple lock, which guarantees that pensions go up by a certain amount every year. Now he's decided that that's not the right thing to do. The same with the two-child benefit cap. And there was this sort of sense of, is that because they are trying to do a more kind of solid, kind of credible policy pitch that maybe reform-curious Conservatives could get on board with? If it's a deliberate shift in tactic now to something which is less that and which is more kind of the traditional vibe of Nigel Farage, it will be interesting to see how that tallies with their argument that they're a government in waiting.
Yeah, and it's also interesting as well. It's reflected in their choice of candidate in Makerfield, right? He's a plumber, right? He's the archetypal, he's the perfect outsider. Robert Kenyon, he's a working plumber. Yes, he's clearly a political enthusiast because he ran for Reform in 2024 and has run for council for them for 3 times, has since been elected and is now running in this. But, he is the archetypal outsider compared to, running Sarah Pochin, right, a former Tory who won the Runcorn by-election for them. Matt Goodwin, again, GB News host, academic in Gorton and Denton. They're going back to, man of the people, man of the street. And, as you say, marrying that with a credible platform for government is the big challenge.
And have you come up with, a settled view about what Manchesterism is? This is this idea that Andy Burnham has found some kind of secret sauce that makes Manchester the most successful place in Britain. And I'm now seeing a lot of sceptical newspaper pieces about whether A, Manchesterism exists, B, the extent to which Andy Burnham can own it.
Well, look, Manchesterism started with the late Howard Bernstein and Richard Leese, the 2 guys who made Manchester what it is today. But, Andy Burnham...
They were the council leader and the chief executive of Manchester Council for a long time.
Who created the sort of growthy model, all about property investments and all of that stuff, attracting investment, services economy, that sort of thing.
And they're kind of like local government heroes for the ages, aren't they? People will write books about them in 100 years.
Well, yeah, no,
they're writing now.
Oh, yeah.
Starting, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I said the other day someone should write a sort of Robert Caro-style book about... He wrote this famous book called The Power Broker about Robert Moses, the man who built New York, and I said someone should do about Howard Bernstein.
I've got it, and I nearly finished it.
Really?
It's very
long. It's like 2,000 pages long. Yeah. Well, someone is doing one on Howard Bernstein, apparently.
Oh, by the way, has anyone read The Power Broker by Robert Caro in the audience?
All the way through.
No one.
No.
I mean, if not even
Nobody
I've done
has.
it. Super nerd here, right? And also, is LBJ? What, 4 books about LBJ?
Yeah, the fifth.
Still waiting for a
The fifth is he's written like 900 pages of the fifth.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get the literary element in to justify us being here at Hay, so we can get to come again next year. Anyway, so yeah, Manchesterism, and how much Andy Burnham? Because you mentioned the two guys who were there doing it for a year.
Well, yeah, and look, what is Andy Burnham running on? He's running on public control, not more public control, no, not ownership.
Yeah.
Of the commanding heights of the economy, i.e. the utilities, etc., and transport. Talking a lot about buses. The B network in Manchester has been a great success, franchised buses under public control. But look, I think Manchester, Herbert Morrison, who was Clement Attlee's deputy and, among other things, Peter Mandelson's grandfather, used to say, socialism is what a Labour government does, i.e., don't try and define it, don't be too doctrinal, don't be too dogmatic. If we're doing it, it's left-wing, it's socialism. And you've got to wonder, Manchesterism is whatever Andy Burnham is saying, doing or wearing. It's not more complicated than that. It is just a vibe. It is a politics that sort of looks and talks halfway normal, which is what the Labour Party seldom does. I appreciate, by the way, that is slightly frustrating for people who are looking at it saying, OK, you're going to be Prime Minister in about 5 minutes.
What's your potential
What are you
platform?
going to do? I think right now what's more significant is what he said he's not going to do, right? He's not going to deviate from the manifesto on tax. He's not going to rewrite the fiscal rules. He's not going to introduce proportional representation without a referendum. Those self-denying ordinances at this point, a bit like Keir Starmer, are probably the most significant thing, rather than trying to say, what is our single transferable theory of Andy Burnham? It's more of a mood than a policy platform, and the guardrails he's operating within. And look, let's not forget either, right, that this is actually like a Labour government that's doing sort of some quite conventionally left-wing stuff. It's like a sort of basically a conventional European social democratic government that has failed to communicate that, has sort of tried to sound a bit more right-wing on some stuff, and has alienated everyone in the process. Maybe Andy Burnham just doing this government in a sort of more charismatic way doesn't require a big policy shift. Let's see.
Well, that's part of the very active conversation that's kind of happening within the Labour Party at the moment, because I think and we've reported this widely, but if you look at some of the stats that have come out over the course of the last couple of weeks, so you've had UK growth forecasts revised up. I mean, they're still pretty stagnant overall in terms of this is quite low level growth, but they've been revised up.
And could become more stagnant as a result of the war.
And the same with inflation, which was lower than expected, but people are expecting over a period of time that will go up again because of what we know is happening in the Middle East. But you've also had waiting lists down, still high, but coming down. And then the net immigration figures, which the government wanted to bring down, and then they came in substantially lower this year than previously and way, way below the peak. So, the government under Keir Starmer would point to the things that it would see as progress that it has been making after this initial period of 2 years. The question for the Labour Party, where there is, and I know that people get frustrated with journalists speculating, but the truth is there's a question within the Labour Party taking place pretty publicly at this point. Do they want a shift in policy direction, or do they want somebody they think can be a better leader, a better kind of communicator, somebody to take the party along with them? And the challenge for Andy Burnham at the moment is he's trying to fight a by-election in Makerfield where he's making a pitch to the constituents in that area and at the same time answer these kind of quite big policy and position-based questions about what he may or may not do if he ends up in Westminster, and then there does become a leadership challenge. And I think all of that is quite head-spinning, but that's the kind of what Labour needs to decide where it's at with all of that.
And on the whole Manchesterism thing, I mean, I love it when there's a place-based ism in British politics, because it's great to hear about how other parts of the country are doing things, or maybe how things were done in other parts of the country in the past. But I'm always a bit sceptical about whether they actually then get imported into running the country in national government. Remember when Theresa May became Prime Minister and everyone said, look at Joseph Chamberlain, the Liberal mayor of Birmingham in 1914, 18 something? And actually it turned out to not be a very good guy to Theresa May's time in office.
He was divisive and unpopular outside of Birmingham, Joe Chamberlain, sort of broke not one but two political parties, and it turned out he wasn't a great example for Theresa May. The Corbynites are very excited about Preston. The Preston model, insourcing the cabinet, the council doing stuff locally. Again, that didn't seem to ever happen outside of Preston. Although Preston, it's a very successful council, but it didn't seem to work outside of Preston. Workington man, Stevenage woman. We always look to these places, and turns out they don't hold the answer.
And also, because quite often when you're Prime Minister, you're dealing with something that has flown in from Iran or Brussels or the White House. And so a place-based ism in the UK only gets you so far when you're dealing with a crisis. Patrick, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Alex, thanks for keeping me company the last couple of days. And Alex and I had a fantastic pint in a beautiful field with a babbling brook yesterday. That was so good.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful setting. It's been a joy. Been a real pleasure.
Thank you to the Newscast crew and the wider BBC crew and the wider Hey crew who have allowed us to be in this amazing tent. Thank you to you for listening, and thanks to the newscasters who came to see us here at Hey. See you again soon. Bye-bye.